Just imagine this. You take a grueling 16-hour flight to attend your family's Thanksgiving dinner. You walk into the dining room, see a massive table, and 18 chairs perfectly set for 18 guests. But as you look around, you realize there is absolutely no seat left for you. Confused, I looked at my mom and asked, "Mom, where is my chair?" The entire room instantly went dead silent. My mother looked me dead in the eyes and said right in front of everyone, "You shouldn't even be here. You are not a part of this family. You have no place in this house." I was literally kicked out of the house in front of 18 people. I didn't shed a single tear that night. I just grabbed my suitcase and quietly walked out into the dark. But guys, the real game started exactly 48 hours later. The exact same mother who couldn't even give me a single chair at her table called me 2 days later, crying and begging like a beggar for $2 million. They hadn't paid their property taxes, and the bank was about to auction off their mansion. They knew I was successful now. They thought a little emotional blackmail would be enough to make me hand over $2 million to save their luxurious lifestyle. But they had absolutely no idea that the very mansion they had just kicked me out of like a stray dog, I had quietly bought its mortgage months ago. And not just that, I had also uncovered the disgusting secret they had been hiding from me for 20 years. According to my grandmother's trust papers, they were never the actual owners of that mansion. I was! Just imagine the look on their faces when they realized the daughter they refused to give a seat to was actually the rightful landlord of their entire house. I promise you, the ending of this video is going to give you absolute satisfaction. Have the people closest to you ever betrayed you like this? Let me know in the comments. I promise I will reply to every single one. And hey, if you're watching on YouTube, please show some love and subscribe to the channel. And if you're on Facebook, hit that follow button to support me. So, let's get into it. Let me tell you how that 18-seat Thanksgiving dinner birthed the greatest revenge of my entire life. To understand why taking that mansion away from my parents felt so incredibly satisfying, you first need to understand what that house actually meant to me. Growing up, I lived in a house that looked like a palace. It had sweeping staircases, crystal chandeliers, and a dining room so big it looked like it belonged in a movie. But despite all that space, I always felt like I was suffocating. In my family, love wasn't free. It was a transaction. My parents obsessed over status and perfection. My 2 older siblings were the golden children. They dressed perfectly. They dated the right people from the right rich families, and they always did exactly what they were told. And then there was me. I didn't want to be a trophy wife. I wanted to build my own life. Because I didn't fit into their perfect, wealthy aesthetic, I became the black sheep. I was constantly criticized, ignored, and made to feel like an embarrassment. So, the moment I turned 18, I packed a single suitcase and walked out the front doors of that mansion. I didn't take a single dime of their money. For nearly 10 years, I busted my back. I worked sleepless nights, took massive risks, and eventually built a highly successful real estate investment firm. I had money. I had power. I had a beautiful life. But let me be completely honest with you. And I think some of you watching this will understand exactly what I mean. No matter how much money you make, or how strong you become, that little kid inside of you never really stops wanting their parents to just be proud of them. You never stop craving that feeling of home. So, when November rolled around this year, and a thick, expensive envelope showed up in my mailbox, my heart actually skipped a beat. It was an invitation to the annual Carter family Thanksgiving dinner. At first, I threw it in the trash. I told myself I wasn't going to fall for it. I wasn't going to go back to the house that made me feel so worthless. But 3 days before Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from my mother. I stared at the screen for a long time. It read, "Please come. Your father is getting older, and he wants the whole family together this year. We miss you. We miss you." Those 3 words completely broke through all the emotional walls I had built over the last 10 years. My mind instantly justified it. I thought, maybe they've changed. Maybe enough time has passed. Maybe they finally realized that life is too short to keep hating their own daughter. I pulled the invitation out of the trash. I booked a wildly expensive last-minute flight across the country. I even bought a beautiful, expensive vintage watch as a gift for my dad. I packed my bags with a heart full of hope. I genuinely believed that I was finally going home. I was so incredibly stupid because I had no idea I was flying 16 hours just to walk into the most humiliating trap of my entire life. Let me tell you, traveling 16 hours the day before Thanksgiving is an absolute nightmare. I took 2 different flights, sat through a grueling 3-hour layover, and then had to drive a rental car another 2 hours through the freezing rain just to get to my hometown. By the time I got close to the neighborhood, I was exhausted. My back ached, and I was running on nothing but terrible airport coffee. But honestly, I didn't care. I was practically buzzing with excitement. During that entire trip, I kept reaching into my purse to touch the small velvet box sitting inside. It was a vintage 1960s Rolex I had hunted down for my dad. He was a massive collector of vintage watches, and I spent an absurd amount of money on it. But as I sat on those airplanes, I just kept picturing his face lighting up when he opened it. I pictured him looking at me, finally seeing me as an equal, and saying, "I'm proud of you, Emily." You know how human brains work, right? When we desperately want something to be true, our brains magically filter out all the bad memories and only let us remember the good ones. As I drove through the dark, winding roads of my hometown, I didn't think about the times they called me a disappointment. Instead, I remembered the smell of my mother's roasted turkey filling the hallways. I remembered the massive fireplace in the living room and the loud, chaotic laughter of my aunts, uncles, and cousins. I convinced myself that the past was in the past. I was a grown, successful woman now, and they were getting older. We were finally going to be a real family again. Around 7 p.m., my rental car tires crunched onto the long, familiar gravel driveway of the Carter family mansion. I parked my car and just sat there for a minute, gripping the steering wheel. The house looked exactly the same. It was a massive, 3-story brick estate, glowing beautifully under the warm outdoor lights. The driveway was completely packed with expensive cars. I recognized my brother's Mercedes, my sister's Range Rover, and my uncle's SUV. Everyone was already inside. The whole family was together. I looked at the house through the rain-streaked windshield. My chest felt tight, and my hands were actually shaking a little bit. It's a crazy feeling, sitting outside the house you grew up in, feeling like a complete stranger. I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk, put the velvet gift box securely in my coat pocket, and took a deep, trembling breath. I looked up at those massive front doors and thought to myself, I have spent half my life trying to get back here. I walked up the stone steps, raised my hand, and rang the doorbell. I was so ready for a hug. I was so ready to say I missed them. But I had absolutely no idea that when those doors opened, my heart was going to be ripped right out of my chest. The heavy oak front door swung open, and there stood my older sister, Claire. She looked absolutely perfect, as always. Not a single blonde hair out of place, wearing a pristine cashmere sweater and a diamond necklace that probably cost more than my first car. When she saw me standing there on the porch, dripping wet from the freezing rain, her smile completely vanished. Her eyes darted down to my suitcase and then back up to my face. She didn't hug me. She didn't say she missed me. She just gave me this tight, awkward, plastic smile and said, "Emily, wow, you actually came." "Mom texted me," I said, trying to keep my voice cheerful despite the sudden knot forming in my stomach. She said Dad wanted everyone together. Claire just blinked, shifted her weight uncomfortably, and stepped aside to let me in. The moment I stepped into the grand foyer, a massive wave of nostalgia hit me so hard it physically took my breath away. The house smelled exactly like my childhood. A warm, rich mix of cinnamon, roasted turkey, and expensive pine firewood burning in the massive living room hearth. I could hear the loud, booming laughter of my uncles and the clinking of wine glasses echoing down the hallway. I took off my wet coat, handed it to the maid, and nervously touched the velvet watch box in my pocket one last time. Then, I took a deep breath and walked into the living room. The room was packed. There were 17 people in there. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins, their new spouses. Everyone was dressed to the nines, drinking expensive scotch and laughing. But the moment I stepped into the doorway, the laughter died. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic silence, but a slow, uncomfortable hush that spread across the room like a virus. People stopped talking. My cousins looked away, suddenly very interested in their drinks. My father was standing by the fireplace. He looked older, his hair a little grayer, but he still had that same intimidating, demanding posture. He looked across the room and locked eyes with me. I gave him a soft, hopeful smile. I waited for him to walk over. I waited for him to say my name. Instead, he just gave me a stiff, 2-second nod, turned his back to me, and resumed his conversation with my uncle. The rejection stung, but I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's okay," I told myself. "It's been 5 years. It's going to be awkward at first. Just give it time." Just then, my mother walked out of the kitchen. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me. She didn't look happy. She didn't look relieved. She looked panicked. Before she could even say a word to me, the dining room chimes rang out, signaling that dinner was ready. "All right, everyone, to the dining room! Dinner is served!" my uncle announced cheerfully, breaking the awkward tension. Everyone started shuffling out of the living room, drinks in hand, making their way to the grand dining room. I grabbed my purse and followed the crowd, telling myself that sitting down for a warm family meal would finally break the ice. Let me paint the picture of this dining room for you. It was magnificent. The massive mahogany table stretched across the entire length of the room, positioned directly under a glowing crystal chandelier. There were gorgeous floral centerpieces, tall burning candles, and fine china plates that sparkled in the light. As everyone started finding their seats, I walked over to the table. My mother was known for her meticulous attention to detail. Every single spot at the table had a beautifully handwritten calligraphy place card resting on top of a gold-rimmed plate. I walked down the left side of the table, scanning the names. Jason, Claire, Uncle Robert, Aunt Susan. I reached the end of the table. No, Emily. That's fine, I thought. I must be on the other side. I walked around the head of the table and slowly started walking down the right side, reading the delicate cursive handwriting on the cards. Cousin David, Sarah, Uncle Greg. I reached the very last chair at the end of the table. I stared at the blank space next to it. I stopped walking. My brain felt like it was short-circuiting. I literally stood there and started counting the heavy, velvet-backed chairs around the table. 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 18. There were 18 chairs. There were 18 beautifully customized place cards. There were exactly 18 people in this family, including the new spouses and cousins. I was the 19th person. I looked down at the table, my vision blurring slightly. You see, when you host a formal dinner party of this magnitude, you don't just accidentally forget a chair. You don't accidentally forget to write a place card for your own daughter. This wasn't an oversight. This was a deliberate, calculated statement. The chatter around the room slowly faded away as people began to take their seats. One by one, they sat down, unfolding their napkins and picking up their wine glasses. Within 30 seconds, all 18 chairs were filled, and there I was, standing completely alone in the dead center of the room, clutching my purse with absolutely nowhere to sit. 17 pairs of eyes were awkwardly looking down at their plates, pretending not to notice me. But my mother? She was standing at the head of the table, holding a silver serving spoon, staring right at me. I looked at her. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it was going to break my ribs. I tried to force a polite smile, thinking maybe, just maybe, it was a terrible mistake. "Mom?" I whispered, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. Where should I sit? And what she said next didn't just break my heart. It permanently destroyed the daughter I used to be. Where should I sit? Those 5 words hung in the air like a thick, suffocating cloud of smoke. The grand dining room, usually filled with the loud, joyful sounds of Thanksgiving, went completely dead silent. The only sound in the entire room was the soft crackling of the fireplace behind me. 18 people were seated around that magnificent table. My own blood relatives. Aunts who used to buy me ice cream, uncles who used to take me fishing, cousins I grew up playing hide and seek with. And not a single one of them looked up. Not a single one of them offered to move over, grab a folding chair, or make room for me. They just stared down at their empty, gold-rimmed plates like cowards. My mother stood at the head of the table. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look apologetic. She looked at me with a coldness that I didn't even know a mother was capable of possessing. "You shouldn't sit anywhere, Emily," my mother said. Her voice was calm, steady, and loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. I literally felt my stomach drop. I took a step back, gripping the strap of my purse so tightly my knuckles turned white. "What?" I breathed out, genuinely confused. "Mom, you texted me. You sent me a message 3 days ago. You said you missed me. You said Dad wanted everyone together." My father, who was sitting at the opposite end of the table, finally looked up from his wine glass. He let out a harsh, mocking scoff that echoed through the room. "She sent that text to your sister, Claire," my father barked, his voice filled with absolute disdain. "It was meant for Claire's new husband. She accidentally copied your old number. You really thought we would invite you back here after you abandoned this family?" The realization hit me like a physical punch to the gut. It wasn't a peace offering. It wasn't a mother missing her daughter. It was an autocorrect mistake, a careless, pathetic technological error. I had spent thousands of dollars, flown 16 hours, and cried tears of joy over a typo. The humiliation was so intense that my vision actually blurred. I could feel the hot, stinging tears threatening to spill over my eyelashes, but I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek. I refused to let them see me cry. "I'm still your daughter," I whispered, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "I'm still family." My mother placed the silver serving spoon down on the table with a sharp clink. "Not anymore," she said, looking me dead in the eyes. "You made your choice 5 years ago when you decided our money and our connections weren't good enough for your little independent fantasy. This is a family dinner, Emily, for people who actually belong here." I looked at my older brother, Jason. He was sitting next to my father, swirling his expensive red wine in his glass. He didn't even try to hide the nasty, victorious smirk on his face. He was enjoying this. He loved watching the black sheep finally get put down in front of the entire family. "So, you want me to leave?" I asked, my voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "I want you to walk out the same door you walked out of 5 years ago," my mother replied, completely devoid of any emotion. "You are not welcome in this house. Please don't ruin our Thanksgiving by making a scene. Ruin their Thanksgiving." I stood there in the dead center of the room. I could have screamed. I could have thrown a glass. I could have pulled the $15,000 vintage Rolex out of my pocket and thrown it at my father's face just to prove how wrong they were about my little independent fantasy. But I didn't. When your heart completely shatters, you don't scream. You just go numb. I looked around the table one last time. I looked at the 18 people who had made room for an entire roasted turkey, massive bowls of stuffing, and expensive bottles of wine, but couldn't make room for one more chair. "Okay," I whispered softly. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just turned around, my high heels clicking quietly against the polished hardwood floor, and walked out of the dining room. I walked past the grand staircase, grabbed my wet coat from the maid in the foyer, and picked up my suitcase. I opened the heavy oak front door and stepped back out into the freezing, pouring rain. As I walked down the long driveway toward my rental car, the cold water soaked through my clothes, but I couldn't even feel it. I was completely numb. I got into my car, locked the doors, and sat in the pitch-black silence. I pulled the velvet box out of my pocket. I opened it and looked at the glowing dial of the vintage Rolex in the dark. And then, I finally broke. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and cried until my throat burned and I couldn't breathe. I cried for the little girl who just wanted her dad to be proud of her. I cried for the daughter who flew 16 hours just to be treated like a stray dog. But most of all, I cried because I knew what I had to do next. They had just kicked me out of the house they loved so much. But they didn't know the darkest, most twisted secret of that very house. I wiped my face, put the car in drive, and headed to a lonely hotel room. I didn't know it yet, but my phone was going to ring in exactly 48 hours. And the woman who just told me I was not welcome in her house was going to beg me to save it. Let me tell you something about crying alone in a cheap hotel room on Thanksgiving night. It is the most isolating, hollow feeling in the entire world. I drove for 40 minutes through the freezing rain until I found a basic roadside motel. It was a massive downgrade from the luxury I was used to in my normal life, but I didn't care. I just needed to hide. I walked into the dusty room, dropped my wet suitcase on the floor, and sat on the edge of the stiff mattress. Outside, the rain was beating heavily against the window. Inside, I was completely alone. No turkey, no family, no warmth. Just me and the deafening silence. I took off my wet coat and reached into the pocket. Along with the vintage Rolex I had bought for my dad, I pulled out a small, flat envelope. It was the gift I had brought for my mother. I hadn't spent thousands of dollars on her gift like I did for my dad, because my mother never cared about price tags as much as she cared about appearances and family heritage. So, before I flew out, I had spent weeks tracking down an old, original photograph of my grandmother, my mother's mother, standing in front of the Carter mansion the day it was built. It was a beautiful, rare piece of our family history. I thought it would make her smile. I opened the envelope and pulled the photograph out. It was black and white, slightly faded around the edges. There was my grandmother, looking elegant and proud, standing right on the front porch of the massive estate. But as I stared at the photo under the dim, flickering light of the motel room, a strange thought crossed my mind. Growing up, my parents had always treated that mansion like it was their personal kingdom. They acted like they had built it with their own bare hands. But they hadn't. The house belonged to my grandmother. She was the one who had the wealth. She was the one who bought the land. And right before she died, when I was just 12 years old, she had pulled me into her bedroom. I still remember the smell of her lavender perfume. She held my hand and whispered, "Emily, you are the only one in this family with a real heart. Don't let them take what belongs to you." I was too young to understand what she meant back then. But years later, when I started my private equity firm and learned how to navigate complex legal trusts and property laws, I finally understood. I ran my thumb over the old photograph. You see, my parents didn't kick me out of their house tonight. They kicked me out of my house. My parents had spent the last 20 years living an absolute lie. They had convinced the entire city, their wealthy friends, and my siblings that they owned that multi-million-dollar estate. But they were just managing it, according to my grandmother's original, ironclad trust, which my parents had desperately tried to keep hidden from me. The true, legal ownership of the mansion was split between me and my brother. But my brother had signed his half over to the bank years ago to cover his massive gambling debts, which meant I was the sole remaining heir to the property. And as if the universe wanted to give me ultimate control, just 3 months ago, my private equity firm had quietly purchased the bank that held the mortgage on the estate. I didn't just own the legal rights to the house. I owned their debt. I was their landlord, their bank, and their worst nightmare, all rolled into one. I carefully placed the photograph back into the envelope and set it on the nightstand. The sadness I had felt in the car was completely gone. The tears had dried up, leaving a cold, hard, untouchable layer of ice over my heart. I wasn't the unwanted daughter anymore. I was a CEO, and I was going to treat them exactly like the bankrupt tenants they were. For the next 2 days, I didn't leave the motel room. I ordered cheap takeout, drank terrible coffee, and worked on my laptop. I pulled up the financial files for the Carter mansion. I looked at the massive, unpaid property tax bills that my parents had been hiding for years. The deadline was approaching. Fast. I knew they were panicking. I knew they were calling every rich friend they had, begging for a loan. And I knew that when every single one of those friends turned their backs on them, they would only have one number left to dial. On Saturday morning, exactly 48 hours after they threw me out of the dining room, my cell phone lit up on the cheap motel desk. The caller ID flashed in bright white letters. Mom. I leaned back in the creaky motel chair, picked up my cup of cold coffee, and stared at the ringing phone. Ring, ring, ring. I let it ring 5 times. Let them sweat. Let them feel the terror of thinking I wouldn't answer. And right before it went to voicemail, I pressed accept. Hello? I answered. My voice was perfectly calm, flat, completely stripped of any emotion. For a second, there was no response. The line was so quiet I could hear the faint, frantic sound of someone breathing heavily on the other end. Emily? Emily? Are you there? It was my mother. But she didn't sound like the cold, arrogant woman who had stood at the head of the dining table 2 nights ago. That woman was a queen demanding obedience. This woman sounded like she was drowning. I'm here, I said softly, taking a sip of my cold motel coffee. Oh, thank God. Thank God you answered, she exhaled, and I could actually hear the tremble in her voice. She was crying. Genuine, panicked tears. Emily, please, we have a serious problem, a terrible problem. You have to help us. Let me pause here for a second and ask you something. If someone humiliated you in front of your entire family, kicked you out into the freezing rain on a holiday, and then called you 48 hours later begging for help, would you feel angry? Would you yell at them? I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I just felt a deep, dark sense of satisfaction settling into my bones. What kind of problem, Mom? I asked, pretending to be completely clueless. It's the house, she stammered, her voice cracking. The mansion. They're going to take it, Emily. They're going to take our home. Who is going to take it? I pushed, forcing her to say the words out loud, forcing her to admit her failure. The county! The bank! Everyone! She sobbed, completely losing her composure. There's a property tax lien on the estate. It's been building up for years, Emily. Your father, his investments went bad, and we had to prioritize other things to keep up appearances. The bill, it's $2 million, and the final deadline is Monday morning. If we don't pay the $2 million by 9 a.m. on Monday, they are going to foreclose on the mansion. They are going to put our family home up for public auction. She paused to take a massive, shuddering breath. Emily, if this goes public, our family is dead in this city. Your sister's in-laws will cut ties with her. Your father's remaining business partners will pull out. We will be homeless. We will be the laughingstock of the entire state. Please, you have to help us. I leaned back in my chair, staring blankly at the ugly, water-stained wallpaper of my cheap motel room. $2 million. For 20 years, they had lived like royalty in a house they didn't even legally own, dodging taxes, throwing lavish parties, and judging people who had less than them. And now, the bill had finally come due. $2 million is a lot of money, Mom, I said slowly, letting the silence stretch out between my words. I know it is, she cried frantically. But we know your investment firm is doing incredibly well. Your brother looked up your corporate filings. You have the capital, Emily. You could wire the money to the county today, and we will pay you back. I swear on my life, we will pay you back every single cent with interest as soon as we sell some assets. Just please, write the check. Save our home. I closed my eyes. I pictured the massive dining room. I pictured the 18 chairs. I pictured my mother looking at me like I was a piece of trash that had wandered in from the street. Save your home? I repeated softly. Yes, please. You are our daughter, Emily. You are family. We need you. I let out a slow, dark laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound of a woman who had finally realized she was holding all the cards. Family? I whispered. That's funny, because 48 hours ago, when I asked you where I should sit for dinner, you told me I wasn't family. You told me I wasn't welcome in your house. The line went completely dead silent. The only sound was my mother's erratic breathing. Emily, please, she choked out, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. I was stressed. We were all stressed. We had 18 guests coming. The catering was delayed. Your father was having a panic attack about the bank notices. I took it out on you, and I am so sorry. I made a mistake, but you can't just let us lose the house over a stupid argument. It wasn't an argument, Mom, I said, my voice hardening into ice. It was an eviction. You threw me out into the rain. I'll apologize in front of everyone, she pleaded, completely throwing her pride out the window. I'll make your father apologize too. We will do whatever you want. Just please, don't let them take the mansion. It's the only thing we have left. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I had her exactly where I wanted her. All right, Mom, I said calmly. I'll help you. My mother let out a massive, ugly gasp of relief. Oh my God, Emily, thank you. You don't know what this means. I will text you the county's wiring instructions right now. No, you won't, I interrupted, my voice slicing through her celebration like a scalpel. She froze. What? What do you mean? I am not wiring $2 million blindly into a county tax account, Mom. I am a private equity CEO. I don't give handouts. I make deals, I said with absolute, terrifying authority. If you want the money to save the mansion, you, Dad, and my 2 perfect siblings are going to meet me tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Where? She asked nervously. At the mansion? I replied. In the dining room. You're going to sit down at that massive table, and we are going to have a very long, very honest conversation about who really owns that house. Before she could ask another question, I hit end call. I set my phone down on the motel desk. The trap was set. Tomorrow morning, I wasn't going back to that house to beg for a seat at their table. I was going back to take the entire house. The next morning, the rain had finally stopped, leaving a heavy, gray fog hanging over the city. It was the kind of weather that made everything look dead and cold. It felt incredibly fitting for what I was about to do. I didn't dress in the designer evening gown I had worn 2 nights ago. I wasn't trying to impress them anymore. I put on a sharp, black tailored power suit, tied my hair into a sleek bun, and grabbed a thick, black leather folder filled with legal documents. At exactly 9:55 a.m., I pulled my rental car up the long gravel driveway of the Carter family mansion. 2 days ago, this driveway was packed with expensive luxury cars, glowing with warmth and the illusion of wealth. Today, it was completely empty. The massive front lawn, which usually looked pristine, seemed slightly overgrown. The expensive outdoor fountain was turned off. The whole estate looked exhausted. It looked like a dying house. I parked my car, grabbed my leather folder, and walked up the stone steps. I didn't ring the doorbell this time. I knew the door would be unlocked. I turned the heavy brass handle and pushed the heavy oak doors open. The grand foyer was dead silent. The smell of cinnamon and roasted turkey was completely gone, replaced by the stale, cold scent of anxiety. I walked past the foyer and stepped into the grand dining room. There they were, my father, my mother, my older sister Claire, and my older brother Jason. They were all sitting around the massive mahogany table. But this time, there was no expensive wine. There was no fine china. They were just sitting there in the quiet, looking like criminals waiting for their sentence. My father looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His face was gray, and he was staring down at his hands, rubbing his temples. My mother was clutching a tissue, her eyes bloodshot and swollen from crying. Claire and Jason were sitting rigidly in their chairs, looking terrified. When they heard my high heels clicking against the hardwood floor, all 4 of their heads snapped up to look at me. Nobody spoke. Nobody smiled. Nobody told me I wasn't welcome. I walked slowly down the length of the table. I didn't stop until I reached the very end. I stopped right at the head of the table. the exact spot my mother had been standing 2 days ago when she threw me out. I placed my black leather folder down on the polished wood. "Good morning," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and loud enough to echo in the massive room. My father cleared his throat, sitting up slightly straighter, trying desperately to salvage a tiny piece of his pride. "Emily," my father said, his voice raspy and weak. "Thank you for coming. We appreciate it. Your mother told us about the deal. You said you would bring a check for the $2 million to clear the tax lien?" I looked at him. The sheer audacity of this man. Even now, hours away from losing everything, he was still trying to act like a CEO negotiating a simple business transaction. "I didn't say I was bringing a check, Dad," I replied coldly, opening the leather folder. "I said we were going to have an honest conversation about who actually owns this house." My father frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What is there to talk about?" "I own this house. It's been in the family for generations. The county is just trying to steal it over a temporary cash flow problem." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. I pulled out a stack of documents from the folder and tossed them into the center of the table. "Temporary cash flow problem?" I repeated. "Dad, you haven't paid property taxes in 7 years. You have secretly taken out 4 different high-interest loans against the equity of this estate just to pay for your country club memberships and Claire's lavish wedding. You are in default to 3 different banks." Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she looked at our father in shock. "Dad? Is that true? Did you mortgage the house for my wedding?" My father's face turned beet red. He slammed his fist down on the table. "That is family business, Emily! It is none of your concern! We brought you here to ask for a loan, not to be interrogated by our own daughter. You don't get to demand money and keep secrets at the same time." I snapped back, my voice rising just enough to silence the room. "And for the record, Dad, it is absolutely my concern, because you're lying to everyone at this table. You don't own this house. You never did." The room froze. My mother's face went completely pale, and she let out a strangled gasp, pressing the tissue hard against her mouth. She knew. She instantly knew what I was talking about. Jason leaned forward, looking genuinely confused. "What are you talking about, Emily?" "Of course, Dad owns the house. Grandpa left it to him." I looked directly at my brother. "No, Jason. Grandpa didn't leave it to him. Grandma left it in a trust. A very specific, legally binding trust." I picked up the original, yellowed legal document from the folder, the one my parents had spent 20 years trying to hide. I looked my father dead in the eyes, ready to drop the bomb that would completely shatter their entire fake reality. "Why don't you tell them, Dad?" I whispered, my voice dripping with ice. "Why don't you tell your perfect golden children who actually holds the deed to this mansion? Why don't you tell them, Dad?" I repeated, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the dining room. My father stared at the yellowed legal document in my hand. His face, which was bright red with anger just 5 seconds ago, turned completely white. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. "Tell us what, Dad?" Claire demanded, her voice shrill with panic. She looked back and forth between me and our parents. "What is she talking about?" When my father still refused to speak, my mother buried her face in her hands and started to sob quietly. The sound of her crying confirmed everything. "Fine. Since he's suddenly lost his voice, I'll tell you," I said, tossing the trust document right in front of Claire and Jason. 20 years ago, when Grandma passed away, she didn't leave this estate to our parents, I explained, my voice steady and cold. She knew Dad was terrible with money. She knew he only cared about status. So, she put the entire estate into a locked, irrevocable trust. According to the law, our parents were only allowed to live here as caretakers until her grandchildren turned 25. Jason picked up the document with shaking hands. His eyes rapidly scanned the old, typed words. "The true, legal ownership of this mansion," I continued, was split exactly 50/50ths between the 2 eldest grandchildren, me and Jason. Claire gasped, looking at our parents in absolute horror. You You lied to us? For 20 years? We were protecting the family!" My father suddenly shouted, slamming his hand on the table to try and regain control. "You were children! You didn't know how to manage an estate like this. We maintained this house. We paid the bills. We kept the Carter name prestigious. I am the patriarch of this family, and this house belongs to me. You didn't pay the bills, Dad!" I fired back, my voice completely dominating his. "You haven't paid taxes in 7 years. You secretly took out fraudulent loans against a property you didn't even legally own. You committed federal bank fraud." My father sank back into his chair, completely defeated, breathing heavily. He knew I was right. Jason was still staring at the paper, his mouth hanging open. Wait a minute," he stammered, looking up at me. "If the house belongs to both of us, then half of this estate is mine. I have a legal right to this property." I looked at my older brother, the golden child who had mocked me my entire life. "You did, Jason," I said softly. Keyword, did. I pulled another document out of my black leather folder and slid it down the polished mahogany table until it stopped right in front of him. 3 years ago, you racked up over $500,000 in illegal gambling debts, I said, watching his face turn ash gray as I exposed his deepest secret in front of the whole family. You were desperate. So, you went to a shady private lender and signed over your 50% trust rights to this house as collateral. When you defaulted on the loan, the lender seized your half of the estate. You lost half our house to a bookie? My father screamed at Jason, practically lunging across the table. "I had no choice!" Jason yelled back, panicking. "They were going to break my legs, and you wouldn't give me the money. Dad, quiet!" I snapped, silencing both of them instantly. I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the table. I looked at the 4 of them, a family built entirely on lies, manipulation, and fake wealth, currently tearing each other apart. When I found out what Jason had done, I continued smoothly. I realized that a random lender now owned half of my family home. So, my private equity firm tracked down that lender. "And we bought your debt, Jason." Jason swallowed hard, his eyes wide with terror. You bought it!" "Yes," I whispered, a dark, satisfying smile finally creeping onto my face. "I bought your half of the trust, which means I now own 100% of the legal rights to this estate. I am the sole owner." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush steel. My mother looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, her makeup completely ruined. "Emily, please," she whimpered. "We didn't know. We swear we didn't know you bought it. Please, don't let the county auction it off. If you own it, you have to pay the $2 million to save it. It's your house." I stood up straight, looking down at the woman who had kicked me out into the freezing rain just 48 hours ago. "Oh, Mom," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "I already paid the county. I wired the $2 million yesterday afternoon. The house is perfectly safe." My father let out a massive, shuddering sigh of relief. He actually closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank God. Thank God, Emily. They thought they had won. They thought that because I paid the tax bill, I was just going to let them keep living there like nothing happened. They thought the obedient daughter had finally returned to serve them. But they didn't understand the real reason I had called this meeting. I didn't pay the bill to save your home, Dad," I said softly, picking up the final piece of paper from my folder. My father's eyes opened. The relief instantly vanished. "What do you mean?" I tossed the paper into the exact center of the table. It was stamped with a bright red, official county seal. "I paid the bill to protect my investment," I said, looking at all of them with dead, emotionless eyes. "That piece of paper in the middle of the table is a formal, 30-day eviction notice. You have 1 month to pack your things and get out of my house." My father stared at the eviction notice on the table as if it were a venomous snake. The bright red county seal seemed to glow against the dark mahogany wood. Have you ever seen a lifelong bully suddenly realize they have absolutely no power left? It's a very chaotic transition. They cycle through fear, denial, and then, inevitably, blinding rage. My father's face went from pale white to a furious, boiling red. He slammed both of his fists onto the table and shot up from his chair, towering over me. "You arrogant, ungrateful little brat!" he roared, his voice shaking the crystal chandelier above us. "You think you can just march in here and steal our home? I paid for the maintenance of this estate for 20 years. I raised you in this house. I will take you to court. I will drag your equity firm through the mud, and I will destroy you." 10 years ago, if my father had yelled at me like that, I would have shrunk down in my chair and cried. But today, I didn't even flinch. I just looked up at him, my expression completely bored. "You're not going to take me to court, Dad," I said calmly, leaning back in my chair. "Watch me," he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You are trying to steal our legacy." "No," I replied, my voice dropping an octave, slicing through his screaming like a razor blade. "I am finally taking back what was always mine. And you're not going to take me to court, Dad, because if you do, the first thing the judge will look at is your financial history." I stood up, matching his height across the table. "You took out 4 high-interest loans against a property you did not legally own," I reminded him, enunciating every single word so it echoed in the silent room. "You forged Grandma's trust documents to secure those loans. That is textbook federal bank fraud. If you hire a lawyer, if you fight this eviction, or if you cause even a fraction of a scene, I will hand those forged documents directly to the FBI." My father's jaw snapped shut. The fight instantly drained out of his eyes. He slowly sank back into his chair, looking like a deflated balloon. I looked at the 4 of them. They were completely broken. The great Carter family, stripped of their fake wealth, sitting in a dining room they were about to be kicked out of. "So, here is my offer," I said, picking up my black leather folder. "And it is entirely non-negotiable. You have 30 days to pack your personal belongings and leave this property. You will leave the furniture, the art, and the vintage cars, because those belong to the estate. If you do this quietly, I will pay off the fraudulent loans you took out, and I will not send you to federal prison." My mother let out a loud, pathetic sob. "Emily, please," she begged, her tears completely ruining her expensive silk blouse. "Where are we supposed to go? We don't have any money saved. Your father's business is bankrupt. We can't afford an apartment, let alone a house. We will be on the street." I looked down at her. This was the exact same woman who had looked me in the eyes 48 hours ago and told me I was not welcome in her home. "That sounds like a temporary cash flow problem, Mom," I said, throwing my father's exact words right back in their faces. "Emily, you can't do this to us," Claire whispered, crying softly next to Jason. "We're your family. How can you just throw us out into the cold?" I walked slowly around the table, tracing my fingers along the back of the heavy, velvet-lined dining chairs. I stopped right at the empty space where my chair should have been 2 nights ago. 48 hours ago, I said softly, looking around the massive room. There were 18 seats at this table. You made room for aunts, uncles, cousins, and new husbands. You made room for massive turkeys and expensive wine. You had room for absolutely everyone in the world, except me. My mother closed her eyes, hiding her face in her hands. "You threw me out into the freezing rain on Thanksgiving night," I whispered. "So don't ask me where you're going to go, because it is no longer my problem. Maybe you can find a nice, small apartment somewhere with 18 seats." I didn't wait for their apologies. I didn't wait for their tears. I just picked up my folder, turned around, and walked straight out of the dining room. I left them sitting at that massive table, surrounded by the ghosts of their fake, pathetic empire. But I wasn't completely done with the mansion yet, because 1 month later, I was going to return to that exact dining room, and I was going to do something that would make my parents sick to their stomachs. Exactly 30 days later, the Carter family packed their fake, miserable lives into a pair of cheap moving trucks. Because of the massive debt and the complete collapse of my father's business reputation, they had to downsize to a cramped, 3-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of the city. Just like I predicted, the moment their bank accounts hit 0, all of their wealthy friends completely abandoned them. The country club revoked their membership. They went from being the elite of high society to the ultimate cautionary tale of fake wealth. I didn't go to watch them leave. I didn't need to. A week after they vacated the property, I drove up the long gravel driveway of the estate. The heavy fog from a month ago was gone, replaced by bright, warm morning sunlight. I unlocked the heavy oak front doors and stepped inside. The house was completely empty, stripped of all their personal belongings, but the massive, vintage furniture that belonged to the trust was still there. I walked straight past the grand foyer and stepped into the dining room. The massive mahogany table was exactly where they had left it. I walked slowly around the room, running my fingers along the back of the heavy, velvet-lined chairs. I counted them in my head. 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 18. But this time, I didn't stand at the edge of the room looking for my name on a place card. This time, I walked straight to the head of the table, the exact spot my mother had stood when she told me I didn't belong. And I pulled the chair out. I sat down. I finally had my seat at the table. I sat there in the quiet, looking down the length of that massive, empty room. But you know what I realized? I didn't want to live here. A house built on 20 years of arrogance, exclusion, and fake pride could never be a real home to me. So, I didn't move my things in. I didn't sleep a single night in that master bedroom. Instead, my private equity firm funded a massive, multi-million-dollar renovation project. We took the Carter family name off the heavy iron front gates and melted it down. We transformed the entire 15-acre estate into the Safe Haven Foundation, a high-end sanctuary, living facility, and educational center for teenagers who were aging out of the foster care system. The very house that had refused to give me a single chair at the table is now providing a permanent seat, a warm bed, and a safe home for dozens of kids who have absolutely nowhere else to go. I watched my family's toxic legacy die, and I built something beautiful over its grave. My family had 18 seats at that Thanksgiving table. They made room for extended relatives, new husbands, and expensive wine. They made room for absolutely everyone in the world, except me. 2 days later, they called me because they were about to lose the house they had told me I wasn't welcome in. They thought I was coming back to save their mansion. They thought I was coming back to beg for their love. They were wrong. I didn't come back as their unwanted daughter. I came back as the landlord of their reality and the person who finally owned the truth. Sometimes, the universe has to completely break your heart just to protect your soul. Walking away from the people who share your blood is the most agonizing thing you will ever have to do. But sometimes, cutting out the toxicity is the only way you will ever survive. If you are listening to my voice right now, and you've made it this far into the story, I want to say a massive, heartfelt thank you. You stood by me through the heartbreak, the 18 empty seats, and the final revenge. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It helps this channel more than you can imagine. Make sure to subscribe if you're on YouTube, or hit that follow button if you're watching on Facebook,